When Valinda Cortez got up that Sunday morning, the thought of rescuing anyone was furthest from her mind. Rain was pouring, and she wanted to be back home as soon as possible. Thankfully, all her daily plan included was a quick trip to the convenience store on the opposite side of the road to get a few necessities. But when she stepped out of her house, she saw something that broke her heart. In the middle of the road sat a gray dog. The dog was bedraggled and wet, the very picture of desperation, but it refused to move. At first, Valinda wondered whether perhaps the dog belonged to one of her neighbors, but she didn't recognize it. So, it must belong to someone else. Some dog walkers left their pooches tied up outside when they nipped in to pick up a few groceries, and maybe this was the case for this poor dog as well. She watched the entrance of the store intently for several minutes, but no one came out. As she approached the dog, she noticed that there was no leash. Even worse, there were no other customers inside the convenience store. It was early in the morning, and most of the residents of this neighborhood probably opted to enjoy a lie-in instead of getting out in this weather. In fact, Valinda herself was still in pajamas and flip-flops, fully intending to get back to the snuggly warmth of her bed as soon as she got what she needed. But as soon as she saw the dog, her concern for its well-being overrode any concerns for her own comfort and other plans she might have had for the day. Since she did not know how the dog would react to her presence, Valinda approached cautiously. Some of her friends owned dogs that greeted her with a friendly wagging, but this dog did not react in any way to her nearness. At this point, Valinda noticed that it was a female dog. She seemed so depressed and despondent, as if she had completely given up on everything. Seeing the dog up close, Valinda Cortez noticed at once that she was in terrible shape. Her coat was grubby and matted in places, and she was missing one of her front legs. Some reddish spots on her fur suggested that she might have been injured recently and that no one had bothered to clean her wounds. There was also something wrong with the dog's eyes. They looked dull and uninterested, with a watery discharge leaking copiously from both of them. That probably bothered her as much as the incessant rain. Who could have abandoned the poor creature here, of all places? Valinda gave the dog another once-over before turning around and rushing back to her car. There, she found an old blanket in the trunk, most likely left behind from a picnic or a barbecue. She couldn't even remember which, but she bundled it in her arms and sprinted back over the parking lot, slowing to a walk once she approached the bedraggled dog. Valinda did not want to spook the dog by coming towards it too quickly or too suddenly, but she needn't have worried. The dog still sat there and remained seated in exactly the same spot and as impassive and depressed looking as before. Very gently, Valinda unfolded the red blanket and laid it over the dog's back. She flinched a little as it touched her, but remained seated. What a poor, pitiful creature she was. Valinda tried to imagine what it must have felt like to sit there, perhaps for hours in the freezing rain, without any hope of a respite. In what she hoped was a low and reassuring voice, Valinda began to speak to the dog, promising her that she would stay with her until help came. The dog did not run away, but did not wag her tail either. Was that a good sign? The fact that she wasn't rejecting her? Valinda hoped so, but probably it was just another indication of how dispirited she was. As she had promised, Valinda remained with the dog. Once in a while, other people passed by, and she felt self-conscious, standing there beside the dog, still in her flip-flops and pajamas. No doubt, some of the people who noticed her assumed that she was having a midlife crisis or something else, but she hoped that at least some of them would see the dog and read the situation correctly for what it was. Standing there in the rain beside the dog, Valinda realized that ultimately she needed so much more than just company. As she racked her brain for a solution, something more that she could do for the dog, she remembered that a good friend of hers, a woman called Sue Massey, volunteered at one of the city's animal shelters. She took out her phone and quickly texted Sue, sharing all the details of the dog's condition and demeanor, leaving nothing out. She ended the message with a desperate appeal for advice or help. "I don't know what to do," she texted. Minutes ticked by as Valinda waited for a response. She was getting drenched in the rain, but she had home to go back to where she could dry off. The dog seemed to have no one. Despite her discomfort, she stayed with the dog and continued to talk to her in soft tones, telling her that she would remain there until help arrived. Although she showed no sign of it, Valinda hoped that the dog understood at least some of what she was telling him. While she waited, her mind started spinning, looking for answers. It was clear that the dog was a stray, but something told her she hadn't always been one. Her calm demeanor indicated that she was familiar with humans, which meant that she once had a family, or at least an owner. But she didn't know how the poor bedraggled dog in the rain had become separated from the home she once knew. Perhaps her owner had passed away and no one else had volunteered to take care of her. Perhaps she had been driven to a deserted spot and abandoned there. Likewise, it was difficult to tell how many days, or perhaps even weeks, had passed since the dog had been abandoned. If she could have spoken, the dog would have told her a sad story. It had all started when she had been left alone in a neighborhood she didn't know. She waited for a long time, hoping that her human would come back for her with food and treats. Days became weeks, and when no one came back, she began to die inside, little by little. Betrayed, she gave up and stopped hoping that this person, whom she had loved so much in her big doggy heart, would come back. Along the way, she got hurt, but no one cared. So she just went on, snatching a few chicken bones or some pizza slices from a garbage bin. And that was how, one day, she ended up back at a place she knew, a place she remembered from the good old days, a place where she used to wait for her human and where she would be rewarded with bits of jerky for her patience. Clinging to that far-off memory of happiness, she decided to wait despite the rain. Perhaps if she waited long enough, her loyalty would be rewarded and her human would come back and take her home. But she did not think that her owner would take such a very long time to find her. Perhaps she had done something bad and her owner no longer loved her. When the strange woman covered her with a blanket, she did not know how to react. Since losing her owner, she had discovered that some people were not nice at all and were not to be trusted. Some of them hit her, chased her, or threw stones at her. Sometimes they acted unpredictably. Would it be wise to trust the strange woman? She didn't know. She did recognize some of the words the woman used when he spoke to her. Good doggy. Those were happy words. When her owner had used those words, it meant treats or going out to the park. But how did this strange woman know that? She also heard, with her excellent hearing, the beep beep going off in the woman's pocket. Her owner had a device like that as well. Maybe that was a good sign. The woman looked at her phone and said, "Guess what, sweetheart? Help is coming for you." 20 minutes later, Sue Massey and one of the workers from the animal shelter arrived with a van and a leash for the dog. Within moments, the dog was out of the rain and on her way to a brand new start. Once they arrived at the Asheville Humane Society shelter, Sue and her colleague got the dog checked in. A veterinarian was ready to take her under her care. First, the dog was scanned to see whether she had a microchip to identify her. Unfortunately, she didn't, which meant that they would never find her previous owner. Then, she was given a full health assessment. The vet paid special attention to the discharge around her eyes, as well as the missing leg, which caused her some concern. The stump hadn't healed properly, and there was some yellowish discharge around the wound that made her fear for the poor animal's health. After weighing the dog, she gave her a shot of antibiotics to fight the infection. Sue was concerned that the dog may have been too ill after her time on the street in the cold, but the vet assured everyone that her illness and injuries were treatable. After the health check, it was time for the dog to get a proper bath. Fortunately, the water at the shelter's washing facility was pleasantly warm. A special shampoo was used to get all the dirt out of her coat. After she was thoroughly dry and warm again, someone clipped the worst knots and tangles out of her coat. Throughout all of these procedures, the dog remained stoically quiet. She gratefully lapped up some water when a bowl was placed in front of her and finished off every last bit of the kibble that was given to her. After all of this attention, a shelter worker led the dog to a large cage where there was more food, more water, and another blanket. When the gate closed behind her, the dog lay down on the blanket. She had a roof over her head. She was out of the cold and the rain and safe from anyone who might try to harm her. Her stump was bandaged up, and although it still stung a little from the ointment which the vet put on the wound, It also felt a tiny bit better. The dog put down her head and dozed off to sleep. It had been difficult to get rest while she was homeless, but now, knowing that she was in a safe place, she was finally able to relax and get some sleep. A few days later, Valinda Cortez asked her friend Sue Massey how the dog was doing. Sue invited her to stop at the shelter so she could see it with her eyes. And when Valinda arrived, she could hardly believe what she was seeing. With proper care and a good bath, the dog, who was now called Cassie, was gorgeous. For several days, Cassie stayed at the Asheville Animal Shelter while she recovered from her injuries and the eye infection. As soon as she was healthy enough, she began to participate in some of the fun shelter activities, such as playdates with other shelter dogs, hikes with volunteers, and one-on-one behavior therapy sessions. Everybody was so kind to her, and she was not hurting anyone. She still missed her owner, but she was discovering that she could trust and love other people as well. And maybe, just maybe, these ones wouldn't abandon her. Cassie looked really beautiful in her adoption picture. As a well-behaved and gentle dog, she was soon discovered by a kind family who adopted her into her home. A new life was waiting for her, and she wouldn't waste a minute of it. What a heartwarming ending. If you have a similar story about an animal you rescued under difficult circumstances, tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear it. For now though, we're out of here. We'll see you in the next video.